Alright, woodworkers. So, getting ready to cut the corresponding joints here in my drawer front, and so I've taken off the sled, I've put back on my fence. What I want to do, I have got to use the exact same bit as I used to get this joint cut. If I don't, sometimes the geometry is not going to match up, sometimes the angle isn't correct. The angle is the most critical thing for this. The other thing is the cutter length here, because I need to have enough cutter length to match the second part as I did to cut the first part. So, same bit here. It's obviously way too high for what it is I need, so I need to drop this thing down. What I'm going to try to do is match the overall length of this dovetail piece here. So I slide this in to where that female section of the sliding dovetail was made. And then I drew a little line here on the bottom, which is what you'll see on this side. So this represents the length of my cut that I need to make. So dropping this thing down, now that the collar's out of the way, I'm going to put in, there we go, a throat plate, a smaller throat plate. So I'm going to be running this piece over the surface, and if there's a large opening here, not to be dismissive of the safety issues that I'm raising, but this piece is going to mess up my work piece. So as I slide this through, if it does start to dip into that opening, that would be a problem. So this is just safer and a smarter way to operate. Okay, so in lining these up, I want to make sure that this cutter is just a hair below where that line is. And the reason being is that when I'm making these cuts, what is far more critical about fitting this piece is that I have good contact on the left and the right side of this dovetail. What is not important at all is what kind of contact I have on the end of this piece. Ideally, what I'd like to do is have the right contact here with the right thickness that would draw the shoulder in to this joint. If I have this piece engaged on the end of my drawer sides, then it could poke out here and the shoulder is not going to engage. I might not also have the capture that I want side to side. So because of that, the height of this thing is critical. What I'm going to do is, in essence, set up for this length, and then I'm going to drop the bit down just a hair so that I will make sure that there's no contact on the end of this board. And if I've done everything correctly, then it should fit well. Alright, so when using a fence on the router table, similar to a drill press, it kind of doesn't matter orientation of this fence with relationship to the bed. It could be at a severe angle, it really doesn't matter. I've got one center point here that I'm trying to establish all the way across, and that's the most critical piece. What I do want to make sure I'm doing, or not doing, is making sure that cutter is not going to engage on my fence at all. So with this, I should have enough room for this to spin freely. And then the only thing that I'll need to adjust, assuming I have the correct height, is going to be how much of this fence is exposed, or how much of this fence is adjusted to expose more or less of this cutter. Alright, so let me do a couple of cuts and I'll show you what this looks like. So this is a really long piece. This is, for how much I need to save, this is maybe 3 feet of material. And so it's very tippy because it's very narrow. I've done two things with this board. Number one is I've cut the ends to make sure that they're square. And then the other thing I've done is I've left it wider than my final dimension. And the reason for that is that I know I'm going to get tear out on the end of this cut. When I flip it around, this face now is going to give me tear out on the end of that cut. And I'm not worried about it because I could always trim off more in the width after I get the fit finely tuned and well working. So, squaring off both ends, I'll be able to run this thing over, flip it around, test the fit. If this works, then I'll flip it around. I'll do the exact same treatment to the other end, and then I've got my sides. And my sides don't need to be terribly long. The rest of this material is going to be used for not the sides, but the back of the drawer. And so I have enough material here to do at least 2 drawers, maybe more. But as I start to fit this, I'm assuming that I'm going to make a mistake somewhere, and then I could always trim off the first ½ inch or so of this board and then start over and have nothing, no ill effects of that. All right, here protection's in, here we go. Oh, I almost forgot. So because of this tippy problem, I want to support this board. What I'm going to do is have just an auxiliary piece here to extend the support as I'm pushing this over. And I'm not going to go all the way through this cut. I just want to push this across until I'm finished with cutting my drawer side. And you'll hear the difference when I engage in this little piece. Then I'll back it straight out, I'll flip it around and go back. I just feel like this is a really not great idea to run this over freehand. I might be able to get away with it, but why risk it? All right, here in protections back in, here we go. That cut, I hardly kissed any of that bit, so I still have a little ways to go. So what I will do is I'll make an adjustment here, exposing more of that cutter, and try this again. A lot of this is going to be about sound. You can hear the tone of making a full engagement of that blade, or pardon me, that bit, versus just a little bit. That was a really high-pitched sound. I can tell I wasn't cutting the whole way across. This one should be different. Totally fantastic if I did this perfect the first time, but that almost never happens. Okay, so it's still way too thick. What I want to do now is, instead of trimming this one all the way down to its final dimension, I want to get this one caught up with that first end. If I were to move the fence back and take a heavier cut, it's just a lot of material and it's more prone to tearing out. So I will leave the fence where it's at, do both of these faces before I make any adjustments. So I adjusted this side last time. I could continue to adjust this side. What I want to do though is make a reference mark here on the fence, and on a white piece of melamine like this one is, you can see pretty well where that mark is being made. So I've marked over here, I'm not sure if you can see that, so that I can tell by moving this back how much material I'm going to remove on this second cut. And I'll continue to do that step, or that part of the process, until I get this thing dialed in. Okay, so second adjustment being made here. I'm trying to gauge the thickness of how much more material I need to take off. There's really no good way to measure final dimension and match that to my dovetail shape. It's a lot of educated guessing. What I do need to keep in mind though is the thickness of the adjustment that I made with this fence is going to be echoed in two cuts. So if I run this pass through as I did here all the way across, and then I flip this around, I've now doubled whatever this adjustment is calling for. So just be mindful of that. It's really nothing to be gained by rushing through this process. Take your time, small cuts, and then until you sneak up on your adjustment and your fit. That's the best way to do it. All right, here we go. Which is great. If I tested this piece and I found that just by cutting one side this will fit in, that's good, but because we work so hard to make sure that the first cut and the second cut were centered, it really doesn't help me to only take off material on one side of the dovetail. I do need to do it equal so that it will slide right in and fit between that half-inch mark or target that we created with that first cut. All right, this should be the last one. Seems like it fit well, but it's awfully snug. Let me see if I can't show you. There we go, and focus. Oh, yeah, it works. All right, so catching a little bit of the shadow here, you can see that I've got a gap. This gap is maybe a 1/16 of an inch, which I'm totally okay with. Much more important is contact I have on both sides of this dovetail, and then the involvement with this shoulder, as we talked about before. So I'm pretty pleased with what this thing is looking like now. Just need to fine tune the other end and I should be ready to go with this. So I'm happy with this fit. I'll do the other end as well. On the dovetail, the dovetail that we just cut, I needed to trim that section off on what's going to be the top edge of the board. So after I cut it down to its final width, from here to here, final width, then I'll cut off some of the top section so that it will come up unencumbered. All right, hopefully that was helpful in understanding sliding dovetails. Really not much to it, but you've got to be patient. You've got to take your time with everything you're doing. Trying to cheat this and speed it up is always going to come back to bite you because it rarely works out where these things fit perfectly the first time. yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing that I will do is I'll take the whole piece and I'll lay it into my table to determine the total length of these sidewalls. I'll cut those off square, make sure that these are the same length, and then I'll use the remainder for an intermediate piece. And I'll talk to you about strategy on that in just a second. Actually, I can do it now. Let me check my time. Yeah, I got time. Okay. So this is an example of one that I cut earlier. Let me pan out just a little bit. So I went through all the same process here. I've cut this one down to length, but I've left it extra long. The joinery on the back is going to look very different. You can do dovetails back here. You can do a couple different things, but my drawer is going to end somewhere at this mark here. And if I were to pull the back all the way back there, I have more storage space inside the drawer, which is good. But because of how this is going to slide in and out of the table, I wanted to have that back a little bit closer to the front, which seems counterintuitive, but once somebody is opening up this drawer, it's going to be tough for them to understand where the back of this drawer is. And so what I don't want to have happen is have this thing pulled out all the way and then drop down so all the contents of your drawer spill onto the floor. And usually there's a learning curve for your clients, but everybody that's going to be looking at this table that you've made, and they're always going to do this to check out the drawer. And if every single time the new person does that and they drop out all the contents, I just feel like that's a really bad legacy. It's going to be funny for the homeowner or whoever your client is, because they're going to know it's coming. But it's also kind of crappy because they have to clean it up. Someone has to clean it up. So what I'm going to try to do is enforce a visual stop. When somebody sees where the back of the drawer is, they'll see that, they'll stop, and then they won't have that proclivity to drop this whole thing. And what I've used here, I'm going to have 3 through tenons on both sides, and the only trick there is putting in both sides so you make sure exactly what that length is. If it's a well-fitting joint, these are going to be square. If they're square or parallel to each other, then you can measure from here to here what the shoulder length is, and then just add thickness here, thickness there, and then you have the length of that back. And so that's what I'm going to do. You'll notice I've avoided my groove for those rails with the joinery. And so that's what I'll do for the back. You could do dovetails, but that means it's going to go all the way in the back of the drawer, and that's totally fine. Nothing wrong with that. It is additional storage space. It's just your call. Okay, cool. I'll see you in a little bit with the next steps. Thanks.